Welcome to the Confluence cast presented by Columbus Underground. We are a weekly Columbus-centric podcast focusing on the civics, lifestyle, entertainment, and people of our city. I'm your host, Tim Fulton. This week, there's a balance to be struck between storytelling and getting to the heart of what matters in writing. That's especially true when writing about the arts. Since 2015, Grant Walters has been writing about comedy and music for Columbus Underground, and he has stories behind the stories. In a conversation with Columbus Underground co-founder Walker Evans, Walters explores the challenges and triumphs of restarting a writing career, the power of connecting with fans that aren't his own, and the intricate process of writing about what truly matters. They also discuss the everyday challenges of music journalism, the importance of supporting the local music community, and understanding the cultural identity of Columbus. You can get more information about what we discussed today in the show notes for this episode at theconfluencecast.com. Enjoy the interview.
Sitting down with Grant Walters, author, freelance writer for Columbus Underground, man of many talents.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, Grant, how you doing?
I'm really good. Thanks, Walker.
Yeah. Happy to be sitting down with you today to catch up on a variety of things. I always have a really good time talking to you because you do so many things out there in the world.
Thank you.
Want to run through a wide variety of things, but just to sort of introduce the audience, if they don't know who you are, for my context, you've been writing for Columbus Underground since 2015.
Yeah, almost going on 9 years.
Which is pretty wild. And one thing that, so primarily writing about music, entertainment, bands, comedians, entertainers, a lot of interviews, acts that come through town, interviews, previews, reviews of shows. Is that fair
I'd say I write concert or comedy preview more than anything else.
Occasional articles about like the local school system and stuff, but primarily the concert sort of stuff.
For sure.
One thing for me is that every once in a while I'll be like looking in the archives, or I'll do a search for something and find something and be like, oh, I forgot about that from like 5 years ago. The most recent example, Nate Bargatze, who hosted SNL.
Yeah.
I totally forgot that you interviewed him like 4 or 5 years ago or something.
And you see, I was so pleased. I was like a proud parent watching, this guy that I interviewed a few years ago. I mean, he was making his way for sure, but seeing him on SNL was really nice. He was a really nice guy to talk to as well. I really enjoyed him. So.
Was he at Woodlands Tavern, maybe? Do you remember?
No, he was actually playing the drive-in, and so this was
during the pandemic.
Solidly like the dark days of the pandemic, where comedians had to be outside and standing on, odd things in front of outdoor audiences.
People had to honk their car horns instead of
exactly
clapping.
So I'm sure he and other folks would prefer never to do that again. That's what it was, and so he was very nice. He was great to talk to.
Nice.
Yeah.
And that episode of SNL was really good.
It was excellent.
Yeah.
He did such a nice job.
He did. He's also coming back to Columbus, I think in January, February.
He did.
March.
Yeah,
and he's playing at I think Schottenstein maybe.
He's like filling an arena now.
Yeah, so maybe nationwide. I think it was Schottenstein, but
yeah,
he's an arena comic now.
I know. So that means I probably won't get to talk to him again. But he's grown too big for my little column. But
yeah,
okay.
you never know. But I spent some time kind of like looking through the archives because I'm like, there's others I'm sure that I have forgotten about. There's ones I always remember because they were like really fun reads. And I always remember the David Koechner story, like something didn't record and you had to start over, and he was like super generous with his time.
Oh, that was Jay Moore, actually.
Jay Moore, okay.
So yeah, Jay Moore.
Jay Moore. Yes.
He I had something that I tried a new app or something that was because it was an incoming call and it just didn't, it was an outgoing call and it just didn't record, and so I was devastated, panicking, and so I contacted his publisher. He's like, "Don't worry about it, I'll handle it." And he called. He's like, "Grant, it's fine. I love talking. Don't worry about it."
Nice.
So he very nicely sat down with me for another hour, just to recoup what we had talked about.
That's awesome.
It was great. He was a good guy.
I think maybe David Keckner, like you met him afterwards or something. I know you maybe talked to him twice over the years. And
he's the one that kissed my bald head when he saw it,
yes.
which was very nice.
Yeah,
it was that was a moment for sure. But he's a sweetheart of a man. Actually, I really love talking to him. So hopefully one of these days we can do it again.
Cool. And in the show notes and the footer of this episode, we'll link to like the archives so people can go back and read some of the stuff. But I was kind of going through and looking. Ben Folds, Chili of TLC, Kathy Griffin, Patton Oswalt, the Goo Goo Dolls, Tegan and Sarah, Tig Notaro, Jimmy Eat World, Melissa Etheridge, Damon Wayans Jr., the Gin Blossoms, Kevin Nealon, the Bare Naked Ladies, Matt Rife, Jason Alexander, 98 Degrees, Carson Kressley of Queer Eye, and Alice Cooper. Just to name a few, which is a really like wide variety. If you like, 98 Degrees and Alice Cooper alone, that's like boy band to like
I know
rock. That's God,
pretty stark gap in between those two genres of music. But
yeah.
It's pretty weird to think about all the people that I've talked to, and I mean, I'm just a guy, from living in Columbus, from Winnipeg, so it's just strange to me. A lot of people ask me, they're like, "How do you get to talk to all these people?" And I'm like, "That's a great question. I don't remember."
Yeah, their publicists reach out because they're coming through town and they're trying to sell tickets
often, and sometimes I'll reach out to, sometimes to no avail, but a lot of times if you're enthusiastic and you can demonstrate that you can have a conversation, they're pretty open. So for some people that I really wanted to talk to, I did the reach out, which was very nice. But Ben Folds was actually the first sort of major music interview I did for Columbus Underground.
And I think I remember you're a big fan too, right?
I love Ben Folds. And he was playing with the symphony here. And I was nervous. I was so nervous because I know Ben's so smart. He's a really accomplished musician, but also a really very intellectual person. And so I worked really hard on the questions to make sure that, they were worthy. And of course he couldn't have been nicer and answered everything that I threw his way with, grace. And so that was very nice. But yeah, it's amazing to think about all the people that I've talked to and had conversations with. And, for them, I'm sure it's nothing. It's just, they're doing their PR stuff. But for me, I mean, some of those conversations were really meaningful, and you feel very connected to them, for a period of time. And it's very nice to be in that position. And this is something I always wanted to do. And I think when I came to you a few years ago and said I really wanted to write.
Yeah. Where did that come from? What was that itch?
I had always said that I wanted to. I did an album review when I was in 9th grade, and I loved doing that kind of stuff.
What was the album? Do you remember?
I don't.
And was it a good or bad review?
It was a good review.
Okay.
It was a good review. But I just remember I started doing a little bit of academic writing or some professional writing for my job in higher education. And I just said to my friend, I'm like, this is fine, but I'd really love to write about music and interview artists. I said, wouldn't that be cool? And she's like, why aren't you? Like, can't you find something to do? And I'm like, yeah, but I'm old and trying to restart my career and become a writer is tough. And so, when I moved to Columbus in 2013, I came and I started reading Columbus Underground, and I thought, I wonder if they would ever, and so I remember you and I having a conversation, and you just said, what do you want to write about? And I said, I don't know, music, comedy. And he's like, great, do it. Let's go.
Let's try it.
So you gave me a shot, which was very, very kind of you. And it's worked out very nicely for me. I hope it's been okay for Columbus Underground.
Yeah, no. A lot of the stuff has been well read. And Thanks. Even the stuff, I always say like what's important isn't always popular, and what's popular isn't always important.
Yeah.
So even the ones where the total number of eyeballs on the article were lesser, like it's still connected with those fans.
Yeah.
So I think there's importance there.
Yeah.
Should also add you're an award-winning journalist because we've submitted some of your work over the years.
Yes.
The Ohio Society of Professional Journalism has recognized you.
Yeah.
I think 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
For your work. So
that was a trip.
Yeah.
But so nice to be of all the people that are writing and doing really good work in Ohio. It was really really humbling to be recognized by journals of journalists and peers that work in the industry and I just do this part time, and so the fact that I got that kind of recognition to me was kind of mind blowing.
I think we can talk a little bit about this toward the end of the episode in my notes about sort of the future of journalism, but I think we're all headed toward working part time in the field of journalism.
Yeah, sadly.
Not to be all doom and gloom, but before we go there, I do want to talk about your book.
Yeah.
Very specific topic.
Very, very specific, very niche topic, as we would say.
Yeah. So I guess tell us where did this come from?
Oh gosh, it's such a long story. So the books that I'm writing are called Decades, and it's a book about the Bee Gees. And it's exploring their catalog, not necessarily biography, but exploring their really massive catalog, song by song, album by album, and telling the stories of how those records got made. So this has a fairly long tail, but I've been a Bee Gees fan all of my life since I was very, very little. But where things really got started when I was in college, and this was at a time in the early 90s when the internet was very much a baby and not really publicly accessible, but we were able to apply to get an email address. And that's not something everybody had at that time.
Sure.
And we worked in these big Unix computers where everything was sort of this command prompt, and that's how you got email. And so I got an account. And as I was exploring, I noticed that other musicians had these mailing lists, listservs that where fans got to talk about music and sort of built these online communities. And I thought that was really cool. And I took a gamble and asked my system administrator, hey, could we set one up? I'd love to do one for the Bee Gees. And they're like, yeah, let's do that. And so we established it. I started to get some feelers, and within a few weeks to a month or so, we started having hundreds of people subscribing. I can't remember exactly how many people it ended up with. When I left college, I actually passed it along to another person who lived somewhere else in the world, definitely not in North America, but they took the listserv over. The listserv just got shut down earlier this year. So, I mean, it had a life of over 30 years.
Yeah.
But of course, it's gotten replaced, by social media and other forums and things like that. But so all that to say, online while I was there, I met a lot of other Bee Gees fans, and my two co-authors, Andrew Monhughes and Mark Crowan, were on that listserv, and so we started having these conversations, and people firing emails back and forth and nerding out about the music for the past few decades. And so during the pandemic, Andrew and Mark actually wrote a Bee Gees biography about 20 years ago that did very, very well. And Andrew had pursued a publisher that had it's a music publisher in the UK, and it's called Sonic Bond. And they specialize in music books strictly.
Cool.
So they published these series called Decades, and what it does is it tackles an artist's career by decade. And we signed on to write these books during the pandemic and started in early 2020. We put out the first volume. It's Decades, the Bee Gees in the 1960s, came out in December of 2021. And the one that's just come out in May is on the 70s. So,
nice.
So 2 books down. We think we have 2 more to go. We'll focus on the 80s next, and we're currently writing. But then we'll do a 90s and 2000s volume after that. I mean, they had a career that spanned 70 years, and so and ongoing. So there's a lot to talk about, and so that was sort of the history of how this all kind of came about. But all of a sudden, I'm a published author, and that's weird.
Yeah. When I think a lot of people think about the Bee Gees, they think about the 70s specifically, right? Kind of the height of the disco, the height of disco, late 70s, early 80s. Do you think that'll be like the best-selling book just by that, or this really for like the music? You're selling to that listserv. You're selling to like the super hardcore fans, and
actually the 60s has done really, really well
too.
That's because awesome. They're a British band, but they also had 8 years in Australia where they actively recorded at the beginning of their careers, and so we actually had a huge response overseas for. Well, huge is a relative term, but I mean within our confines of what our publisher can do, and our subject matter area, people really responded well to the first book too. So I think the 70s, I think they're pretty much neck and neck right now, from what I understand.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
and you've been traveling a bit with this.
Yeah,
as well.
We did a sort of a mini book tour over in the UK in September. So we went to Tame in Oxfordshire, which is where the residence of Robin Gibb was, and Robin's actually buried there. And so we did a book talk there, which was really nice, and we had about 40 people show up and listen to us, and they traveled from all over England and came to see us, which was very nice. And then we did another one in Wales. So that was cool, just to sort of be able to come face to face with people who love the music as much as we do and talk about the books. And it was pretty detailed, pretty geeky, but but that's the stuff we love. And so that's the whole reason why we wrote these books, was because people People love talking about their music, and for the people that don't know their music as well, who maybe only know Saturday Night Fever or their '70s output, I mean their catalog is massive, and so we're hoping that by publishing these books, that somebody will read them and discover the depth of that, and that they've been so influential. I mean, they started recording music in 1959.
Wow,
so,
yeah.
I mean, it's a pretty stellar career, and I think that those years where Saturday Night Fever and Spirits Having Flown, their follow-up album, from 75 to 79, I mean, it scratches the surface. So,
Sure, yeah. So my personal connection to the Bee Gees, and it's funny because you mentioned like the late 90s listserv sort of era, when file sharing, MP3s, everything started to get passed around. I was a teenager, so it was sort of like opening the door to discover new music.
Sure.
There was a rapper, like a hip hop artist, who did covers of songs, and he did a Stayin' Alive in Trance. Are you familiar?
Oh, Entrance, yeah.
Yeah.
Entrance is a Canadian group, actually.
Oh, really? Okay, nice.
Yes, Stayin' Alive was a number one hit in Canada. So
Nice, yeah.
They had two. They were number one twice with Stayin' Alive. So.
Yeah, and that was that like late 90s,
Yeah.
like sort of Eurodance
Yep.
era of music. So it's really interesting to see like that sort of come back around, because everything is very cyclical over 20 years, right? Like
Very
the way
much so.
people have nostalgia for like the early 2000s now. Like that's how far we are removed from the 90s to the 70s.
Gosh, yikes.
Just to make us feel
Right.
feel old. So one of the other things I wanted to ask you was, did you set out to write a book from the beginning of this journey with them, knowing that they had written a book before? Because I think a lot of people, when they think about, I want to write a book, it's like a very daunting. How do you get from zero to published? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a multi-year process. How do you break that down into sort of achievable goals?
Sure. Well, I mean, they asked me to come on board, and so we developed a friendship. But as I started journalism work and things like that, they had seen that, and I'd written some Bee Gees related articles for another outlet that I was writing for at the time called Albumism, and that was focusing on the album art form. And so I did some Bee Gees retrospectives and things like that as well, and Andy Gibb as well. So
Didn't you speak to one of the kids?
Yeah,
too?
Spencer Gibb is actually a friend of mine.
Samantha, was that also?
And Samantha, yeah. Samantha
okay.
is Morris's daughter, and Spencer is Robin's son. And so, yeah, I've had a chance to connect with them. Spencer and I still talk pretty frequently. He's pretty busy right now, but he actually wrote the two forwards for our books.
Oh, cool.
So that was very nice to have members of the Gibb family, talk to us and share some of their insight, but also really support the projects, which was, incredible. That was great.
Yeah.
But they brought me on board as they knew that I was doing some journalism works and had wanted me to, contribute. They knew I had, a lot of knowledge. Andrew and Mark are huge collectors and historians. Andrew actually worked for the Bee Gees for a period of time, doing some different projects for video and television and things like that. And Mark actually had the largest Bee Gees collection in Australia and donated it all to the Queensland Library. So it's sitting in their archives now. So the two of them, very serious collectors and serious historians. So the fact that they asked me to come along was very nice. But in Andrew's words, I'm the fancy writer. And so they want to, I think they benefit from me being able to wordsmith us. And but it's been really cool. So they asked me to come on, and, we sort of just started working from there and assembling bits and pieces of information. And so really it was developing the timeline. It was developing a series of events. It was laying out all the albums and tracks. And then from there, building out a narrative around that as well. So that was sort of our process.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Not to get too far ahead, but are there any other bands or artists that you would consider a similar type of like working on a retrospective?
Oh yeah, I'd love to do Simon and Garfunkel. I would love to write a book about Chris Isaak, who's another favorite artist of mine. So yeah, I'd be up for that. We have to finish these first before
Sure, yeah.
before
What's next?
What's next?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean definitely. I think that's a possibility that I'd love to explore in doing that. And Spencer and I actually talked about writing a book. And I'm hoping this doesn't hold us too beholden to this project, but writing a book about sort of the late 60s music business in London on Carnaby Street, and sort of focusing on, Brian Epstein and Robert Stigwood and all those music moguls that set up shops in London and helped to create the British invasion. So that might be something we'd be interested in tackling. So that's
cool.
that might be a fun project for the future.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, we had an event slated last week to talk about sort of music journalism in Columbus. So I wanted to touch upon a few of those topics
Yeah.
with you as well. It's something that we've always, I wouldn't say struggled, but, gone to great lengths to try and really get our arms around with Columbus Underground. Music journalism is important, both local bands, touring acts, and you've done a great job kind of covering more of the touring acts than I know you have talked to some local bands, Camp, and I'm going to forget some of the others off the top of my head. But it's not always as well read as you want it to be. Those kind of like concert, and Matt Ellis goes to a lot of shows and with photos.
Yeah,
and
he's such a great photographer, and he captures everything so well.
Yeah, he's excellent at that. But it's a valuable part of the ecosystem, the creative scene here in the community. So we want to be supportive and nurturing of that. So some of it's just like you gotta just get people right and get people excited. One just keep pushing that boulder up the hill. Do you feel the same sort of way when it comes to some of these kinds of things?
I think so. Yeah. It's hard to know what's going to stick and what people are going to sort of key into and things like that. But, an anecdote that I had, not from Columbus Underground, but for Albumism that I wrote for, I had written an article on David Cook, who was an American Idol winner, and he came to Columbus, or he was touring, but also came up with an album, and I said, I'd like to talk to him. So I did, and my editor was like, nobody's going to read that. Like, that's not really our core audience. And then it ended up becoming one of the top 5 articles read on the website for the year. And I was like,
great.
So sometimes you don't know. Like, I think there's just sometimes, people will, depending on the fan community, depending on if they share stuff out for us, which is always very nice. Sometimes artists and their publicists don't, put our articles out into the ether for folks to consume. So, so when that happens sometimes and we get a nice little bump, then that's great. But yeah, it's hard to predict sometimes, I think, what's going to ignite and what's not going to. So sometimes I write things and I'm like, well, hopefully this is great. Like, this is a popular artist. And then, we have 35 reads and you're like, oh, all right, well, that wasn't what I thought, but
sometimes there's not a lot of longevity as well if it's around an event. You know, if it's a concert preview and you're talking just about that show or a review of those photos, like once that week is over, who's going to go back and look at it? Unless it's an up and coming band and it's like, oh, look at these photos we took 5 years later of this band that like 20 people at their show and now they're playing stadiums. So like that's kind of cool to have that sort of little snapshot in time. We experienced the same thing when Jesse Bethy, another freelancer of ours, came to us with the idea of he wanted to do sort of like an archaeological take on the North Market graveyard, and we're like, people probably aren't really going to read that, but you're super into it, so we're into it, so knock yourself out. He's like on the 9th. It's been the most well-read series of the year. It's great. Like every single, he'll do another installment and like another 20,000 people read it. He does another installment, another 20,000. So it's been great. With music, part of it is, do people want to read interviews with local bands? Do they want, list of upcoming concerts? Do they want concert reviews and coverage? Do they want album reviews? Are people still even releasing albums these days? And how to make sure, what does Columbus sound like? Is it the indie rock scene? Is it the hip hop scene? Is it the sort of like country bluegrass scene? Or is it a collection of everything?
It's really hard to say. I don't know the formula. I wish I did. But so I think I try to interview a variety of artists that I think are appealing to folks, and sometimes I think, oh, if this person's playing an arena, then 20,000 people are going to show up. Somebody's got to read this, right? Somebody's going to want to see it, and then sometimes you're like, oh, I guess nobody. That's fine, but they've got a ticket to go to the show. So it's just hard to figure out what'll take off and to find the correct balance. And I guess the answer to your question is like, I don't know what the mix of Columbus music is. I think it's a lot of everything. And so, country and Americana does really well here, but so does heavy metal, and so does rap, and so does,
electronic music. We've got a vibrant DJ scene, and that has its own, subgenres within. So it's a lot. You have to really try and be everything to everyone, which is tough.
It's really hard to do. And I'm also limited. I mean, I'm only part-time, and
sure.
it's hard to if I could dedicate, if I had a career to be able to spend like figuring out metrics and
and go out to shows every night.
and also do that, and that's part of it too. And
Yeah.
well, the industry is really interesting because they really want you to come out and watch the show and
Yeah.
react to it, because they really want you to capture, the feel of the live show and tell other people about it so that they buy tickets to go to the next thing or go check them out. And so I realize sometimes I don't think that's always where our readers are, because
Yeah.
reviewing a show after you're done with it, I don't know how much that appeals to people.
It's like you missed it.
Yeah,
Here's the
right.
thing
It's
that you
like,
didn't
this
go
was
to.
so great, but
Yeah.
too bad you didn't go, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so-
Well, like when Richard Sanford does the theatrical reviews, he tries to get in on opening weekend
Yeah.
so that he can have the review done, and then the show runs for 2 more weeks, so
Right.
people can go see it. Yeah,
which makes
yeah.
perfect sense.
Yeah,
right?
or like movie reviews with Hope and George. They watch
Yeah.
it opening night, and then it's in the theaters for a while.
But I've always tried to poke around with the artist just because I guess it's interesting. Maybe it's interesting just to me, but I hope it creates more for the artist too, because I like to get to know the people that create my art and that I appreciate. And so I guess maybe there's a little bit of selfishness there, that I love doing that, and I'm hoping other people like it too. But I was finally doing reviews, because a lot of people want album reviews and it's like, I'm not a really great music critic. I know that about myself. I really don't like writing about stuff. If I discover I don't like it, I don't really enjoy pursuing it. And so, when I get pitches for certain things, I know I'm like, I know I'm not going to want to write about that. And so I don't. And maybe that's my limitation. Maybe I need to push myself a little bit more, but I also don't want to turn it into like, if I really dislike this album and I want to be honest, like, is that great for our readership? Is that great for our reputation? Is that good for, I don't know. But
Yeah.
other people do that really well. I don't think I do.
Yeah. The financial model of this sort of stuff has changed a lot over the years as well. And that's one of the things that we've been kind of talking internally about, because we do want to bring on some more freelancers to help cover the scene, but bands don't have a budget to advertise.
No.
Small venues don't have much of a budget to advertise.
Yeah.
The larger venues are growing more and more consolidated, and so their budgets become these massive things that are untouchable to small publications like us. They'd rather dump their money into the duopoly of Meta and Alphabet,
Yep.
Facebook and Google,
Exactly.
to sell concert tickets, and they don't really throw us a bone. So how do you rebuild that sort of ecosystem of local spending in addition to so that we can pay writers to cover the music and have the music promote their shows to our readers and keep that wheel turning, I guess, is the
And I wish I had a good solution to that. And I also find too that a lot of artists and their publicists still really want to go for big publications. And so I think if you're a smaller publication like us, or a smaller outlet, that people would rather go to the Columbus Dispatch, because that's a name that's it's big journalism, and and no shade to the writers there, but it would be nice to have an opportunity sometimes to get some of the people that they do, because I would love to spend time with them and whatnot. But sometimes we don't always get that opportunity.
Sure, yeah.
And they're very candid about it. They're like, yeah, we're probably not gonna.
Yeah. Well, especially if it's a band or a musician or comic, they're in town to do a show. They don't want to spend 6 hours of their morning
Right.
talking to every media outlet in town. They'll pick 1 or 2.
Correct, yeah.
So they can still kind of like chill out before their show or whatever.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's us. I mean, Kappa has been very nice about throwing us, really, really good folks, and saying, we know you do a good job, so we'd like you to talk to them. And,
you had Craig Ferguson recently, which was really cool. And then
Craig's so great.
I know Sam Morrill, who as a comedian, I love him. It sounds like he doesn't really like talking to the media that much. He's been sharing all those clips of like sort of trolling TV news.
How he purposely goes in and tries to humiliate people in local news and tries to catch them off guard. He was fine with me.
I was saying, reading your piece, it kind of sounded like he started off a little surly, and then you kind of like cracked that nut a little bit and started talking about like sports and like other things other than just like, how's the tour going?
I really work hard on
Have
that
you
stuff.
ever been to Columbus before? Like,
What can we expect from your show? And it's
Yeah,
like, well, what do
yeah.
you think you can expect from the show? Like,
Yeah.
it's a comedy show.
Right.
I think personally interviewing folks, I think they're often surprised that I have a lot of questions prepared, and they're like, oh, you did research. And I was like, I said, that's important to me, right? I don't want to walk into a conversation be unaware of what you do
Yeah.
and things like that. And so it's just, yeah. So I do spend a lot of time purposely trying to prepare for that so that I ask them different things than they get, in other places. Because,
I think people like those kinds of interviews, though.
Yeah,
I mean,
I do
it's the it's the hot ones, the Sean Evans style, where like he's sitting down with an interview and asking like a question from the past, and they're like, "What?"
Yeah.
yeah. Or to, I guess, to go more Canadian, it's the Nardwuar approach.
It's the yeah.
yeah.
For sure it is.
Yeah, music journalism right there. It's like here's an album that I know that you liked when you were 13, and they're like, how did you know that?
Exactly.
Yeah. And he's like, and it's a gift and it's for you. Yeah.
Yeah. I love asking some of those questions that not catch them off guard, but I think make them think, where they pause and go, oh, that's a good question.
Yeah. Yeah. They'll remember that encounter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they really appreciate that. And that's been something that I've really tried to focus on is doing anything. And because I'm a music geek, I mean, I love every part of the music making process and comedy as well. I love hearing about the creative process, and so and often I find if I'm on a level with them that they get a sense that I'm really into what they're doing and that I really thought about it and I understand the craft a little bit. They're often much more responsive, and so sometimes they're able to turn around, as you say, some of those more sort of bristly interviews into something that's a little bit more palatable, where by the end they're like, okay, this was all right, thank you.
Yeah,
And I was
yeah.
like, okay, well, good. I'm glad
Yeah.
we got to that good place.
Yeah.
There have been very few interviews that I've had that have not gone well. There's only been a couple where I've been like, oh, I've got to cobble something out of this thing, and I'm not sure what it's going to look like. But it's always been, I learned later on that they don't like doing interviews, and I'm like,
Yeah.
well, your publicist shouldn't.
Yeah.
Maybe you should think about
They
that.
could have just gotten off the phone on a bad interview
Yeah.
and then just been like, well, here goes another one, So you
Exactly.
never know when you're catching them.
So
Yeah.
I've had to really learn not to take it personally. I interviewed Patton Oswalt for the first time, and I mean, just really short answers. I mean, the whole interview took about 9 minutes, and I got off the phone and I was devastated because I love him as a comedian.
Yeah.
And I read later on, he doesn't like talking on the phone. He'd rather be in person or
Yeah.
do email. And I'm like, well, I could have done that.
Yeah.
Maybe not in person, but we could have done an email interview. And so you just kind of stand back and your heart breaks a little bit because I'm like, God, I admire him so much, and now I've got to put this article out and make it look like it was this fantastic interview when it really stunk. And I felt awful about it. And so those have been few and far between, thankfully.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Just to circle back to music real quick, the Music Columbus, formerly the Columbus Music Commission, they rebranded to Music Columbus. They're doing a survey right now. I don't know if you saw. We
I haven't seen it yet.
share some information. This is brand new, just within this week. They're running a survey throughout the month of November, mostly talking to musicians and people related in the industry. So promoters, venue owners, anyone that works with bands, musicians, entertainers in any kind of capacity. I think they're trying to just get like a grasp on where the community is right now,
Sure.
to find out like what we're doing well and what we're not doing well, like within that realm. As someone who's been reporting on this for a while, are there things that you think we could be doing better as a city to support the music scene, either in terms of attendance, awareness, lack of venues, lack of just live music in random places?
Yeah, I've thought about this before, truly, because when I talk to venues or talk to publicists and things like that, I've gotten quite a bit of information. I have a good friend who works, does publicity for Atlantic Records in New York, and so she's always been very kind to sort of share some insight with me. It's really hard because they're just out there trying to get as much information out as possible, and they strike out a lot too. And so even a big publicity machine, in the New York, in the New York base that's promoting stuff internationally can still sort of struggle with that. And I don't know. I mean, I would love better communication. I think between press and venues would be awesome, because I feel like I get a lot of information from big publicity firms that are in LA, New York, Nashville, and I hear very little from local. From local firms or local venues and things like that as well. And so I'm on some listservs and I know when acts are coming, but I also don't know who to contact sometimes. Like sometimes finding somebody where I can get an in and be like, can you get me an interview? Can I get this information?
Yeah.
That's 80% of the battle in writing about music is figuring out the right person to get to so that you can access the artist at some point. So sometimes that's really hard. Also, the timing is really tough too. Like I'll get a notice that a band's coming in
In
a
2
day
days.
later, in 2 days,
Yeah.
right? And be like, we'd love to see you at the show. Come and write a piece. Do you want to do an interview? And I'm like, yeah, this would have been great like 2 weeks ago. But,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
And again, I'm only being part-time and occasional. Like it's hard to map those things out. And sometimes you don't get any communication at all. And so sometimes we even do outreach, or I'll reach out to somebody at a venue or at a PR firm or something like that, and I'll just get zero response. And it's just like, oh, okay, well then I don't know what to do with that then. And so, you know, it's hard sometimes. So I think that communicative piece is really important, where, you know, the local press, and you know, certainly for the big outlets too, but also for us, like if you want us to get in the venues and talk to people, like we need to know what's going on. Like, we need to know where people are.
Right.
We need to notice, probably, because our writing staffs are not huge and they're, you know, mostly not full time. And, you know, how do you, you know, if you want us to support you, how can we make that better? So I think that's certainly part of it. I think having a lay of the land of where venues are in the city and what they do, and the kind of clientele they're trying to attract, and, you know, what artists they're looking to bring in, you know, that's helpful as well. And so it's hard. Sometimes it's not understanding the criteria of how, you know, bands show up in Columbus or music acts show up in Columbus. And for local folks, I often don't get a lot of pitches from local musicians either. And so I get tons more and I understand that, because, you know, there are PR machines that work for them.
Right.
So
your average local band doesn't have a PR budget.
Yeah. So is there a way where we can be more explicit on our behalf, you know, from Columbus Underground or from another outlet, of like, we want to support local artists. So here's an avenue in which you can send us music, or you can send us a pitch, or, you know, things like that. May not always be able to say yes based on scheduling and things like that, but I mean, it would be nice to be able to figure that out. And sometimes that happens, but it's not very often.
That's some great insight, and something we'll definitely keep that in mind as we're trying to bring on some more freelancers. Just help connecting those dots.
I think so.
So not everything is so siloed.
Yeah. Absolutely. And also I think, you know, there are some local acts that are trying to break out into the larger sort of audience and things like that. And so sometimes they're not always focused on things like Camp's a great example. You know, I had a nice interview with Camp, but I mean, they're now, you know, nationally known and are doing very, very well, and they're touring extensively and things like that. So trying to 21 Pilots is another one. Like, you know, I heard nothing. The last time I wanted to interview them, they were just like, yeah, they're not talking to anybody in the local press. And I was like, oh, that's weird. I mean, they're from Columbus, why wouldn't they? But I guess they don't have to, because, you know, they're now globally known and very successful. So I think there's just some of that stuff where sometimes it's easy to miss from either side. So
Nice.
Yeah.
So a tradition with the Confluence cast is to always ask a guest a set of questions, a pair of questions at the very end.
Okay, great.
What do you think Columbus is doing well, and what do you think Columbus is not doing well? Doesn't have to be in regards to music journalism, book publishing, anything that we've talked about. It could be anything on your mind. What are we doing well as a city? Or you could start with not doing well.
Oh, well, I mean, I think in terms of doing, I think, this is hard.
Surprise.
Yeah, things were doing well. I think I'm liking what I'm seeing in terms of investing. I'll talk about the art scene. I think that there is an increasing investment in our art scene. And I've seen things growing, and, you know, I used to be connected to the improv community. We now have 2 full-time theaters open, comedy venues. I mean, I know that we've talked a lot to the folks that work at the Attic and the comedians that work there and Don't Tell Comedy and things like that. So there are those things that I've seen are really very cool. We're getting bigger festivals. We're getting bigger names coming through. So whatever is happening there, I mean, I think we're getting to a better place where I think there's more concrete places for people to explore the arts in Columbus. So that's been very nice. And that's different than when I, you know, moved here, you know, 10 years ago. And that's improved. What I don't think we're doing well, can I say inclusion? Not super well in lots of different ways. And so I think that we have a really culturally rich city, and I don't know how much the city is doing to really take advantage of that, to explore it, to connect people to it.
Yeah.
So I feel like our city feels very siloed in lots of different ways. And as it continues to grow, I don't know how that's going to change or anything like that.
I feel like the one thing, and I'm not trying to answer your question
Yeah,
for you.
no.
I feel like the one thing people are willing to like venture outside their comfort zone with is food.
Yeah.
Like they will go find that Somali restaurant on Morse Road or that like, authentic taco truck out on the west side.
Yes.
But how do you get them to do that for cultural events,
Right.
music events, theatrical
Exactly.
events, everything else?
Yeah, and I think that's a really that's a really important consideration. That I think if we want to be a city that's quote unquote cosmopolitan and closer to things like Chicago, or if that's where people, I think a lot of people crave to have us be a more exciting city in lots of different ways, and so that's part of getting there, right? Is appreciating and supporting those diverse cultures and different venues for cultural enrichment and things like that. So I think that's important. We're not super great about preserving history here. And so visiting the UK was a really good reminder of that, about, I went and touched a Roman wall. And of course, our things are never going to be that old, but I think if you walk around Columbus, there are very few cues in terms of our heritage and sort of where the city, or if they're there, they've been buried, burned, things like that.
Paved over top of.
And built over top of, things like that, So I really think people need to learn about Columbus and where it originated, how it was created, both the difficult things and the productive things that built the city, to learn more about, what does that mean for the future and how do we preserve, that. So that's something I've always felt when I've come here, and versus visiting other places that I think very much dig into that. Columbus doesn't really talk a lot about its... I also think it needs to be comfortable with what it is, and I think a lot of people really there are times when I get frustrated living in Columbus too.
Sure, yeah.
But I think I wish more people would appreciate it for what it is, and also for what it isn't. We're not New York City for a reason. We're not Chicago for a reason. We're not Nashville. We're not we're not Seattle for a reason. And so what are the reasons that we have to really appreciate what Columbus is, and how do we highlight that? I think as a cultural project, through the media, I don't know how we better. I mean, of course, Brent and Jesse and folks do a really nice job of that for Columbus Underground, and other folks too. But a lot of times, I don't think we talk a lot about those aspects of our city's existence, and I don't know how to change that necessarily, but those are some things that I think about as a resident of Columbus, and sort of and I live in German Village, and so I see the history there every day, and it's very tangible, but not so much for other parts of the city, and I know it's there, and so German Village is not the only historic neighborhood in Columbus, and it's one that everybody seems to like to visit because we see people there every day, and that's great, but where are other places where you can seek out some of those really interesting pieces of history and culture, and I think all of those are things that I kind of think about.
Nice. Oh, great answer. Grant, thanks again for taking the time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Confluence Cast presented by Columbus Underground. Again, you can get more information on what we discussed today in the show notes for this episode at theconfluencecast.com. Please rate, subscribe, share this episode of the Confluence Cast with your friends, family, contacts, enemies, your favorite critic. If you're interested in sponsoring the Confluence Cast, get in touch with us. We can be reached by email at info@theconfluencecast.com. Our theme music was composed by Benji Robinson. Our producer is Philip Cogley. I'm your host, Tim Fulton. Have a great week.